Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NAO's Ask the Expert session this week. My name is Lalisa Hall, and I'm the Membership Communications and Advancement Director for NAO, and I want to thank you all for joining us today on this rainy day here in Portland, and I hope it's sunny somewhere around the state. And so today's session is about how to pivot to a virtual annual fundraising event successfully. And with us today is Brennan Wood. Brennan is the Executive Director of the Dougy Center, and I'll come back to that shortly. We also have Lauren Deli-Clark, who is pivotal to this presentation, and she is with Ray's Agent. So just a quick word about the Dougy Center. The Dougy Center is an NAO member. Thank you for being part of our network. And the Dougy Center's mission is to provide support in a safe place where children, teens, young adults, and their families who are grieving a death can share their experiences. So Brennan, a little bit about Brennan. She is very focused on supporting grieving children and families. That's her life work. She currently serves on the board of directors for the National Alliance for Grieving Children and is also a past member of the board of directors for the Willamette Valley Development Officers. So welcome, Brennan.
Thank you, Lalisa. Happy to be here.
You're welcome. And then Lauren is a principal consultant at Ray's Agent. For over 20 years, Lauren has helped hundreds of organizations become more mission capable, raising millions of dollars for incredible programs. And as a former frontline fundraiser, she has been in the trenches, cultivating donors while planning lavish events, and knows how to overwhelmingly fundraise and knows how overwhelmingly fundraising events can be. So she has great expertise and has helped over 25 organizations pivot very quickly to virtual events during this global pandemic. I also want to say that the Dougy Center is an awesome organization, and so glad that both of you are here today. So with that, Curtis, next slide. Yeah, I kind of jumped a little bit there. So this program would not be possible without our great supporters and our funders, and I want to acknowledge them. So right there you see Maya Memorial Trust, the Ford Family Foundation, MJ Murdoch Charitable Trust, the Oregon Community Foundation, and the Collins Foundation. We also want to thank the Kinsman Foundation, the Carpenter Foundation, and the Gordon Elwood Foundation. And we wouldn't be able to do this without our corporate sponsors. And our corporate sponsors at the Friend Plus partner level are Columbia Bank, First Interstate Bank, Comcast, and Heritage Bank. At the Friend Plus sponsor level, we have Miller Nash, Graham & Dunn, The Sequoia, Brown & Brown Insurance, McDonald Jacobs, CFO Selections, and The Standard. And at the Friend sponsor level, we have Portland General Electric. And we want to thank both our corporate sponsors and our funders who have helped us with these online sessions, having pivoted from our in-person sessions to our online sessions. Thank you all. So moving on to today's topic and today's agenda, we've gotten through our introductions, and the presentation is how to pivot to a virtual annual fundraising event successfully. We're going to have a facilitated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So before I hand things over to Brennan and to Lauren, just a couple of things to clarify in Blue Jeans in terms of engagement tools. Here's how you can enter into the chat function or also be able to post questions. So you're able to enter the chat function and connect with Curtis Brooks, who is our training coordinator, who is manning the show here, or myself if you have technical difficulties. And there's a little speech bubble icon on the right of your screen. So for questions on content, which we're going to ask you to shoot your questions over to us, there's a Q&A function, and that can be accessed by the Q&A icon on the right side of your screen. If you wouldn't mind, please don't use the chat function for the questions. Put your questions in the Q&A function box. And if you see a question that someone else has asked that is similar to yours, go ahead and just like it so we know how many people are really focused on wanting answers to that particular question. And just another note, we will be sharing materials, the presentation, the slides, and any other materials that Brennan and Lauren would want to share with you. We'll be sending that across to you after the session. alongside an evaluation on how you thought the session went. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brennan and Lauren. Brennan and Lauren, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lalisa. I'm really honored to be here today. Lalisa actually reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to share a little bit about our recent pivot from our in-person fundraising event to a virtual event. And I was more than happy to do that. And I immediately said, Ray's agent and Lauren need to be a part of this because they were such a critical part of us successfully pivoting our fundraising event. So Curtis, you can go to the first slide, please. So just as kind of an overview of what the Dougy Center typically does, this is the 23rd year that we have raffled off a Porsche Boxster. And we've combined that with our annual fundraising event, which we've actually been doing for, over 30 years now. And that event is by far our biggest fundraising event of the year. It's been branded Reflection for the last over a decade for sure. And it typically raises almost half of the two events combined, the raffle and the gala benefit. They raise almost half of our operating budget. So it's a really big event for us. Typically, we've held it at the Portland Art Museum the last handful of years, and we have almost 600 people in attendance. What I would say about Reflection is that it's very mission focused. We have never taken that fundraising event and made it a themed event. The theme is Reflection, which is a skill that we use with the kids and families at the Dougy Center who are grieving. So it's really a very mission-focused event. And it includes children's art from kids in our program in the silent auction. It's a large silent auction. We have, the typical games that you think of when it comes to silent auction events. Then we move up to the ballroom at the Portland Art Museum for a sit-down program and dinner and live auction and paddle race. So it's a big event, and it's a lot of people in person. So obviously the impact of COVID-19 was pretty significant on this event. Curtis, you can go to the next slide. So our event was scheduled for May 8th, and pretty early on in things shifting, we recognized that there was a high likelihood because of the global pandemic that we would not be able to hold this event. On March 12th, when the no large gatherings of over 250 people went into effect and the stay-at-home executive order went into effect kind of immediately following, we recognized that we really needed to pivot this event to a virtual realm. We definitely needed to adjust our fundraising goals accordingly and kind of really took a look at what we typically raise from the raffle and the event and what we thought we could realistically raise in the climate that, we had about 6 weeks to pivot the event, and looking at where we were at. Obviously, because of the timing of things, which some of you may, just kind of have a completely different experience. If you're looking to pivot an event over the summer or into the fall, you have a much larger runway, perhaps. For us, much of our fundraising takes place in, February and March and April leading up to this May event, our pre-commits, our corporate sponsorships, those kinds of things. So it was a really interesting time to try to pivot the event and to really look at what could we do effectively, and what our expectations would be for goals. We wanted to not only pivot the event because of budget implications if we didn't pivot the event, but we also really wanted to try to, under these not ideal times and not ideal circumstances, take advantage of whatever platform we might have to share about the mission of the Dougy Center. So Curtis, you can do the next slide and hand it over to Lauren, who will talk a little more about logistics.
Thank you so much for letting me join you today. This has been a great opportunity for Brennan and I to talk about how we did this for the Dougie Center. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with a virtual fundraising event, I did want to just give a little explanation of it. You know, virtual event is something that takes place just entirely online. So it is something where you either can do an online auction only. You could just do donations that you would do a email campaign for, or you could do a live stream broadcast in conjunction with an online auction and asking for donations. So the Dougie Center chose to do a full live stream broadcast with an online auction component and also a paddle raise that was virtual for donations, incorporating their Porsche Boxster raffle into that as well. You know, you need to find a virtual model that fits your mission and your donor landscape. So that's something to take a look at. This is what we did for the Dougie Center based on what, you know, they needed to do at the time and what their event typically looked like. So with live stream broadcast, you know, we really looked at utilizing their social media. We wanted to make sure that we could use that to both promote their event and also host their event. Live stream broadcasts through social media platforms are the best way to engage folks, especially if you already have a strong presence with that, and the Dougie Center did. So the next piece with that, when we decided what that platform was going to look like and that we were going to use Facebook Live, we also needed to move to who was going to host it. And Jonna Wells is the auctioneer that has been with the Dougie Center for 15 years, I believe. Yeah. And just the right type of host that we needed at that moment. And we also thought about bringing Brennan into that role as well, so they could share the efforts, because it is a very heavy lift for a host to do a virtual live stream, wanting to make sure that they could have a good balance. And Jonna and Brennan have a great rapport and both did a lovely job hosting this event. In that event, we wanted to make sure that there was a lot of mission-centric messaging. So making sure that throughout the entire event, from the opening to the close, that those that are watching both understood what the Dougie Center does, but also were inspired to participate, whether that be bidding or giving a donation. So we had to make a strong case and an ask, a call to action. And that also happened with the online auction, being able to feature that for them throughout the live broadcast, not with actual live bidding happening, but online bidding occurring, highlighting the auction packages that they had. Also with the raffle, we wanted to really highlight that as well, because it is a signature piece to this event. And so we closed the live stream with that drawing, typically how they would at a live event, where they would do the drawing at the end of the night. And then the final piece of that is event production. So that's the other component of this virtual fundraising event, making sure you have, not only the streaming platform figured out, but a team that can be put together that can help with the audiovisual. So lighting, camera, sound, cameras, and then the graphics that are needed for your production. Also, if you're going to do any pre-recorded videos, which Brennan and I will talk about that in a little bit, of how that was incorporated into this event. And then having some technology support and some people that are able to help moderate behind the scenes. You can go to the next slide, Curtis. So how do you pivot to a virtual event? This is the question that we get a lot from folks all over the country asking, how do you do this? So if you've seen a virtual event, you've seen what it looks like, but how do you actually get it all to come together? So the first thing that we did with the Dougie Center was we created a virtual event plan. We wanted to figure out what are the things that you absolutely need to have in this event to make it a success. You can't just translate something from the ballroom to something that's broadcast. It doesn't necessarily match. You have a limited amount of time to get people's, attention, and you want to make sure that content is very strong so you can keep people engaged. So before hosting a virtual event, here are just some of the questions that I would ask you to consider. What kind of experience do you hope to deliver? Where do you want the content to be seen? When is the best time for the event? Is it during the day? Is it in the evening? Is it on a weeknight or a weekend? Will you require event registration? What tech is needed to execute the event? And how will you promote your event? And then what key performance indicators or data do you plan to track? Because that is one thing that is a very new piece to a lot of these events, is that through doing a live stream event, you can actually track who's watching, who's participating, the engagement time. So your analytics can be very strong with this. So once you answer some of those questions, then you can move into building your plan. And the plan would include a timeline. So you want to time out how exactly you want to execute this and all the different things that are needed in order to have this come together. And communication is number one. So once you create your plan, communicating with your supporters is going to be essential in them understanding what's going on. So we kind of talk about the when, the where, the how, and that is when the event is going to be held. So people get the word out, save the date. This is where the event, when the event is going to be, date and time. Use your newsletters, your email campaigns, and your social media to get the word out to folks. Everyone's becoming more and more comfortable with this digital arena. So, mailing things isn't as effective. It can still happen, but use the digital to your advantage. The other piece is where to find the information for the event. So you want to share a URL so people know where to go, know where to find the information that they need. And also if you have a hashtag, or create a hashtag so you can start building community around your event that's going to be virtual. And the last thing is how to participate. So this is a big one for folks. People want to know, how can they watch? How can they bid? How can they give? So you want to make sure that you have accessibility. You want it to be also very inclusive. So we recommend, and this is what the Dougie Center did, was there was no cost to attend the event, to watch the event. We opened up RSVPs and collected those RSVPs, but we didn't require anyone to pay a fee to be able to watch this event, which was really important because you do want to encourage all people being able to attend. And then the other piece is making sure there's clear language, large fonts, high color contrast. So when you are communicating your message before and during the event, that it's very easy for people. The next piece with pivoting to a virtual event is an online auction. This has become a very popular one. There's a lot of software companies out there that you can utilize for this. We use Greater Giving with the Dougie Center. They have a long-time contract with them, and they have a great mobile bidding platform that you can easily put all your packages, all the things that you've procured, and put those in an online auction. What's really important about an online auction is the photos and the descriptions. It's a high marketing piece, a bit different than an in-person event. And for the Dougie Center, they typically have a lot of children's art in their silent auction. And it's a really strong component to their mission, both having participants who are actually in the program with the Dougie Center be there at the event alongside their pieces that they've created. So we had to shift that a bit because we couldn't do that same piece in an online auction. So focusing more on those experiences that people could have was more, the direction that we had to take. Right now, I would say that with your online auction, you want to make sure that you have put into consideration the climate that we're in right now. And before you start procuring items, that you decide on whether or not it's appropriate to make some of those asks to the businesses that maybe you've used in the past. With the Dougie Center, they had procured most of their items. Those were almost, I would think, complete, Brennan. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we were pretty close to. Yeah.
Pretty close, yeah. So for the groups that now are planning ahead, then they're starting that process. it's a different landscape. So just continue to be really cognizant of the climate that we're in and whether or not that ask is appropriate. The next piece that I want to talk about is the content creation for your event. So making sure your virtual live stream is both visually and verbally appealing. So creating a run of show that's very succinct, that is easily accessible, that contains certain content that is really specific to your mission. And one of the pieces that we had the Dougie Center do was we actually had them pre-record some videos. Brennan, do you want to talk just really briefly about what we did for your opening?
Sure, yeah, because we made a decision that I should be on camera for the entire live stream event, which I think for those executive directors out there is something to really think about and consider your participation in the event. It is a heavy lift to be on camera for an hour to an hour and a half, and so really thinking about how you can engage, what's best for you and what's best for your audience as far as engagement. Because of that, my kind of opening speech, what typically in our in-person event, we don't have a lot of talking heads. We try to kind of keep that to a minimum. We do a welcome video of some folks, but really the only speech is mine. And so we knew we needed or wanted to have that component of really connecting to the mission in that way. But it also was, it's a significant chunk of time. I think it was about 8 minutes long. So we made a decision to pre-record that as if it were live. And for any of you who might have seen the event, or you can still see it on the Dougie Center's Facebook page, I think we pulled it off pretty darn well. Most people that didn't know thought it was happening live. So we recorded that so that then I could be more present for the rest of the event, since I was going to be on camera for so long. So I would encourage you, especially as an executive director, if you have a lot of other things on your plate, try to do things to really lessen that lift for yourself.
Absolutely. And it worked really well. We did that, also with the appeal video, to be able to tell the story. But, you can do a lot of pre-recorded videos, and the entire thing doesn't have to be live streamed. The people watching it don't necessarily know that.
Yeah,
and the tech piece. Yeah.
Yeah, some of our shorter videos as well looked like it was folks, streaming in from their cell phones, but they were pre-recorded as well.
Yes, and it was very effective and made us on the tech side very happy too, so we didn't have to worry about those, connections to those folks. The other component for, how to pivot to virtual is putting your event team together. So, really you want to think about the people you have on staff. Brennan has a great team on the development and communications side who were just ready to jump in and help take this on, and were very essential in making this happen. But they knew they couldn't do it themselves. They knew that this was a little bit out of their comfort zone in terms of what they typically do. And so, being able to put a team together, they brought us on to help with this. Also, their AV provider, McGorn Video, who's a longtime AV provider for them, John Owells as the host. And then our team helped a lot with, some event production, the data tracking, being a monitor and moderator for the live event. And I would say that, your event team is really important, so you're all on the same page to come together, look at that planning timeline. And then when you actually execute the event, making sure you rehearse what you're going to be doing, testing all your equipment before you go live is really important. I see a couple questions coming in on the Q&A, so I just wanted to jump in on those real quick, if that's okay, Brennan.
Yeah.
There was one question about the raffle of the car and how do you ensure that it's legal, with the Oregon Department of Justice laws only being able to sell within the borders of Oregon. And absolutely, that the Dougie Center is very well versed in this, ensuring that happens. And that is something that you do need to take a look at if you consider doing a raffle. And you are in the state of Oregon. You can sell tickets online right now, with approval from the DOJ, but you cannot sell outside of the state of Oregon. So if someone's in Washington and wants to buy a ticket online, they cannot do that.
Yeah, and we have a prompt that someone has to answer that they are currently standing in the state of Oregon in order to purchase a ticket for our online ticket sales. And then we sell raffle tickets starting in December, leading up to the event in May. So we sell up to 2,000 tickets, and we start selling those in December. So we sell those in many different ways at the auto show, through many different avenues and venues. And then the culmination of our reflection event is pulling the winning ticket, because it's a big celebration for someone who won the Porsche box.
Thank you, Brennan. The final thing I want to talk about how to pivot to a virtual event is just a couple decisions that need to be made from moving from an in-person to a virtual. One is budget. So looking at your budget, across the board, doing a virtual event is less expensive than an in-person event, especially if you're doing a large gala. But you should look and adjust your fundraising goals, which is what the Dougy Center did when they decided to switch and pivot this way. Another piece is looking at your sponsors and how can you honor the benefits of your sponsorship with a broader audience, and increasing their digital presence. How does that impact what you've agreed to with them, and maybe coming up with some new ways for some virtual event benefits. The Dougy Center was able to really showcase their sponsors, but I think with even more time, there could have been more benefits added that we couldn't do at that moment. Another piece to consider is technology. So does your staff or volunteers, do they have the capacity to take on that heavy lift of technology? The online platform really becomes that main interface for your attendees to your event. Whereas before, if you had an in-person event and maybe you were utilizing an auction or online bidding, it was really on the back end. So now what you're seeing is going to be on the forefront. And does your team or staff have the ability to be able to pull that off? Because it can be a big learning curve, especially if you're having to do it quickly. Production too, you want to look at your production and make sure the person or the people that are helping you with that have the capabilities to be able to produce the level to which you want your production to look. The Dougy Centers was very professionally done and beautifully lit and really well executed. And for some groups, maybe some small organizations, that doesn't seem as accessible. But I do want to encourage you to look at that, and the production piece is going to be so important if you do a virtual event that's in a live stream format. But you can do a lot with an iPhone. So if you need to go that route, you absolutely can. I would just recommend shooting everything in landscape mode so you can get the right formatting. And you can do fun graphic overlays even when you shoot things off of an iPhone, and be able to make it look even more professional than it is. So you don't have to have a huge production team to do it, but you just really want to make sure good lighting, good sound. Also consider the climate that we're in right now and the messaging that you're going to be conveying on your live stream broadcast or through your virtual event. It should touch on the situations that we're in, the global pandemic and social justice. You don't want to ignore those pieces because of what's happening right now. And also talk about ways that your organization is involved in those things, because that's so on the forefront of people's minds right now. Another piece is just think about your revenue generators, what kind of tech you might need to do an online auction or collect donations. And then what's your procurement strategy if you have to collect donations for an auction? Go back to that climate question to determine, what's appropriate to solicit at this time. And then, choosing your platform, what is something that you feel comfortable with in terms of hosting? It can either be Facebook Live, like the Dougy Center utilized. A lot of people are using YouTube Live. People are also putting it directly on their websites and then simulcast streaming it to other places. So keep thinking about those things as you're making this pivot to virtual. And then next slide, Curtis.
Hey, Lauren.
Yeah.
Before we head to the next slide, there are a couple of questions that I think
Okay.
would be relevant at this point in time. So Hillary asks, you mentioned the need to assess our donor landscape when deciding what kind of virtual event is a fit. If live stream broadcast with online auction might not be a fit for us, what are some other possibilities?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So, a virtual event doesn't have to be this full production of what the Dougy Center did with a live stream broadcast. A virtual event can be a webinar like what we're doing right now. So it can be something that's very informative to your donors where you could have, people sign up and log in and do exactly what we're doing right now with a PowerPoint and being able to talk through pieces. That's definitely something you can consider, and you can have a call to action through that as well. Either a text to give or driving them to your website to get donations. So it can be very simple, like a webinar. Another thing you could do is, sort of when a group that we worked with had an online auction that they were doing, but they didn't want to do the virtual live stream event, but they did do a quick Facebook Live sort of launch to their online auction. So they had a celebration with all their board members, streaming in from different locations and being able to celebrate, the opening of it. And then they did a closing when the online auction was closing. They were able to do something where they would, come together, celebrate their supporters and close the auction together.
I see a question about real-time donor recognition as far as content creation. And one of the things that I think was really powerful and kept the momentum going for our event was this kind of real-time donor recognition. So we had two platforms happening at once. We had the Greater Giving platform where people were donating or bidding on auction items. And then we had this Facebook live stream with the chat feature. And people who were giving on the Greater Giving platform in real time, especially during our virtual paddle race. So typically in our event, we have a child sponsorship special appeal. During that time, the production team, so Lauren and her team, were populating a place for us to look, a monitor where we could look and see who was giving while it was happening. And so we were recognizing people for their gifts in real time. So longtime Dougy Center supporters, volunteers, people who were giving, I know so many of those folks. So I was able to say things like, hey, I know these folks and they're watching from New York City and thank you so much for your gift of, $10,000, those kinds of things. And I think it really creates a momentum and a warmth to the event that I think really helped our event feel more connected to the folks that were watching it.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Brennan. You caught the second question. So,
yeah.
Lauren, if you want to, go ahead to your next slide.
One thing I'll mention, there was a question from Vince. If you use Facebook Live, did that exclude anyone who does not have a Facebook account, which is a great question. A lot of people have asked us that. If you make your event public, then anyone can access it regardless of having an account or not. So if they're watching it through their computer, very easy to do. If they're going to watch it through their phone and their mobile device, you actually have to download the Facebook app to access it, but you don't have to have an account. So making sure your live stream is public is really important. And that applies for YouTube as well, but especially Facebook, just to make sure no one has any issues with that. So the next piece for just pivoting to virtual, these are some examples on the screen of some instructions that we used during leading up to their event in terms of the precast that happened 30 minutes before the live event. Just so people knew how to watch, how to bid, how to make a donation, promoting the raffle further. One thing you want to keep in mind is not everyone is savvy in technology. And you don't want to assume that people will understand how this all works because it is a newer platform for people. So really dedicating time to have step-by-step instructions on how to do these things is really essential. And having maybe even a FAQ section on your website dedicated to, information of where the event takes place, when it's going to happen, how do I do it, how do I pick up items if I win something, that kind of thing is really important to have. So don't be afraid to over-explain things, because you're going to have a lot of people that want these things, want to understand how it's all going to work. Another thing just to keep in mind as you decide to pivot to virtual is just really communicating your pivot to key stakeholders so they can help understand both what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it's going to work, and they can share that with their networks and anyone else out there that has questions. We also recommend that when you pivot to virtual and you start creating your event, that you really keep your program to 45 to 55 minutes, maybe even an hour. The Dougy Center went a little bit longer. That was really due to donor recognition, and we really utilized and capitalized on the fact that there was a lot of engagement happening online. But really, we're seeing over the course of the last couple months and the amount of events we've done, people start to tune off at around the 50-minute mark. That's where it drops off. So if you can just continue to keep that in mind and try to keep it to an hour, that would be ideal. Really use social media as well for promoting this. It's a big marketing tool. It helps you get a lot of analytics as well. You can do sponsored ads. So there's a way to get it out there in an even bigger way when you use social media. We also recommend, if you do an auction format, an online auction, that you open it a week before your live stream. So that way it maximizes the amount of time that you have folks to be able to, become a bidder, engage, place their bids, and then you can promote your event leading up to the live stream as well. Some other fun components that you can add to a virtual event is a watch to win drawing. So as people are logging in and doing comments, and you can see who's who's watching, you can do some raffle drawings, being able to thank those people for continuing to watch, and it keeps it exciting for everyone to know that those things are coming. The bottom line is, don't stop fundraising. I think that's the piece that what we're telling folks is most important. A lot of people ask, what's the biggest risk to pivoting to a virtual event? And our response to that is not doing it. So, you need to be able to problem solve and innovate. That requires risk, and it can be scary, but there's some really good examples out there of how to do this, and it's sort of where things are going at this point when we're looking ahead. Brennan, do you want to talk about what worked and what could have gone better for us with this event?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think, as with anything, you learn as you go along. This was our first time of pivoting to a virtual event. And yet we have this long history with this event. So we have kind of this proven track record of success with the raffle and the benefit. I think that, finding the right balance of voices is really important. And I think in parts of our event that worked really well. In other parts, there's things I might in hindsight tweak a little bit, but I think being really thoughtful about content creation and what you want to highlight and staying really mission focused is really important. I think one thing that we were really aware of is just staff learning curve. As you mentioned, we have a great staff, and they had never pivoted in 6 weeks to a virtual event before. So getting the right people on the team, knowing that you need to bring in support, and also that the donor learning curve can be a little clunky as well. So really being clear in communications. We definitely had folks who kind of felt like, I don't know how to do this, this is hard. So we had quite a few donors who I engaged with leading up to the event who come to the event every year and give a gift, who said, can I just give you a gift now and not have to worry about trying to watch it? And that worked great. And then I followed up with them after the event with a link and said, if you want to just click on this link, you can watch any parts of it you can. And here are some times to look at, like, it started here, we acknowledged you here, those kinds of things. I think another thing that worked really well in our favor is that, we typically in an in-person event are here in Portland, Oregon. The Dougy Center is a national center for grieving children and families. There's 500 programs across the country and around the world that are based on the Dougy Center model in some way or utilize the Dougy Center model as inspiration. And so we were able to connect with a broader audience for this event, and I think that worked really well. So those were some things. There's always these little things in hindsight that you say, oh, well, maybe we could have done this better or this better. One of the things I think we did really well was kind of the presentation of all of it. It looked polished and professional, and that was really a direct tribute to who we partnered with. There was a question about percentages. Someone asked what our budgeted goal was versus what we changed the goal to. And so, and I'll just be very transparent. This is a long-standing event, so we raise a lot of money through this event. I know there's people who raise more, but it's a really significant event for us. And it raises, typically we budget for it to raise in the last handful of years, the combined benefit and raffle right at about $900,000. And we lowered our budgeted goal for fundraising to $500,000, which we exceeded. And then the one interesting thing is that it costs significantly less to put on this event. We ended up spending about 10 to 15% of what we normally spend on the event. And I think that some of that was also through generous support. So I would say that, budget anywhere from around 20 to 25% of what you normally are going to spend on an event. And that makes it more accessible for some smaller organizations that maybe are, don't have the capacity to throw a huge event where they don't know if the fundraising goals the ROI will be there. So I think that those are some really kind of good things to think about. We partnered with folks to help with the tech stuff, and I think that's huge. So maybe we can just skip to the next slide because I know there's lots of questions coming in and I do want to have time to answer those. So wanted to talk just a little bit about engagement, and I think this might answer some questions that are coming through. I think that for this virtual pivot, especially when we did it, it was so new for people. So really hand-holding folks a lot and really engaging with them as much as you possibly can. That might feel different currently or moving into the future if you're planning an event in the fall. Perhaps, people will be more accustomed to it. But for us, we really wanted to connect with people and connect people to this event. And one of the great ways we did that was to ask people to host a party virtually. So we asked people who would normally have a table at our event to still host a group of 10-ish people, either through the Zoom platform or through the Facebook Live watch party. And they brought in their folks. They would host a Zoom party and live stream the Facebook, share their screen, live stream it, and then watch it together. And that was a really effective way to engage people. The other thing that is, I think, really, good communication, acknowledging donors, really trying to connect with people during the event, people engaged. Someone talked about people dropping off and how do you keep people engaged. And we were very fortunate. Our event went over, it was quite long. It was an hour and a half long, and we really didn't see many people at all drop off. One of the reasons, I think, was us having our Porsche Boxster raffle at the end of the event. I think that helped. We tried to do a few things throughout the event to keep people engaged. We also tried to front load some of the fundraising. Like, we did this special appeal before we talked about our live, quote unquote, live auction items or our larger auction items. So I think really trying to, create content that your folks are going to resonate with, and really try to engage. I know, Lauren, also, I think you were going to talk about the chat. Is that right?
Yeah, and there are a couple questions that have come in too on the side here, sort of about, sort of that donor engagement. And what we have found, it's been a great tool, is the chat feature, the comment feature. There's an example of it on the slide here of what it looks like. And how this really benefits groups that we're seeing is that it's allowing for that connection and that community that an in-person event helps create. And so what we want to see with these virtual events is that kind of interaction. So if you can do shout outs to people that are watching, when the Dougie Center started the event after Brennan's welcome, they were saying, hey, we see you're watching from Canada, we see you're watching from here and there. And that really was a fun way to start it off, because you could see people all over the country, all the way to New York City, participating. So and then Brennan knows so many of her donors, so being able to call out names, people love that. And it just really helps with that stewardship piece of being able to celebrate, their contributions like you would in an in-person event. And just keep in mind, when you use the chat feature, that can add time to your event. And I think that's what, we saw, the additional time, even though we had, basically scripted it out for an hour. We knew we were going to run over a little bit with doing that donor recognition and, acknowledging the people that were participating in the chat. A couple things that we would recommend, and there's a couple questions that I saw pop up about this. Have a moderator for your chat. So they had their communications team moderating the chat, and then one person from our team was also moderating. That way we could answer questions that were either technical questions or being able to just acknowledge, like you see on this example on the screen, when a gift came in, being able to say their name in the chat. So have a moderator, that's really important, just being able to make sure that nothing also inappropriate pops up. Nothing did for them. I haven't seen that in the 8 events that we've done that are these live stream events, but it's just good to have someone in there making sure that nothing inappropriate pops up. A couple people have asked about that.
You can move on to the next slide, Curtis. So just really quickly we met our adjusted goal. I think there was a question and I typed in an answer. I've been trying to kind of type in a few answers here and there. We adjusted our goal and ended up exceeding that. So we adjusted it down to $500,000 for the combined benefit and raffle. And we exceeded it. We ended up landing at $580,000 post-event, when everything was wrapped up. The other thing that I would just share is that because of the nature of a virtual event, we had the opportunity to connect with folks after the event and ended up getting 2 really significant gifts just after the event from folks who didn't contribute ahead of time and didn't contribute at the event, but watched it and then after the fact gave significant gifts. So I think that engagement is really important. Communication is really important. Our sponsors really enjoyed this event. I believe they all, I heard nothing but positive things. I think they felt like, there were opportunities for them to be acknowledged in a different way in this environment. We also had a lot of really positive viewer feedback through that chat feature, but then also after the fact. I think people were really pleasantly surprised. And one question I saw in the Q&A was someone asking if we will, continue in this format in some way. And I would say that yes, first of all, I don't know when we'll be able to gather in large groups again, but we felt like it was very successful and that there are some benefits to a virtual footprint as well. So even when things go back potentially to having larger in-person gatherings, I think we will take some of the lessons that we learned from this experience and utilize those as we move forward. We typically have a fall event that looks very different than this event, and we're talking now about what that event might look like in a virtual realm. Then, next year for 2021 for this event, we don't know if we'll be able to gather 600 people together in one room. So we're really continuing to learn and continuing to listen and try to evolve as things change in this kind of rapidly changing landscape. Lalisa, what were some of the other questions that really rose to the top?
Thanks, Brendan and Lauren, for that pretty intense but very informative walkthrough of your virtual fundraiser. For folks, when we send out the slides, the recording link, we'll make sure to send a link to the Dougy Center's Facebook page so you can watch the virtual fundraiser. So one of the questions here I wanted to talking about live stream. Did you all have sort of a backup plan in terms of connectivity in case the live stream got dropped as you guys were kind of running this virtual fundraiser? What was the backup plan?
Yeah, so we actually had the AV provider load in a couple days prior to the live event and set up in the Dougy Center living room and do even some, connectivity testing to make sure there was enough bandwidth, really to ensure that those pieces were in place, which is what we recommend, test ahead of time. Don't assume that it's all going to work when you go live. And so that was one piece. So we had a lot of testing that was done. Even the day before the virtual event live stream, we did a quick, Brennan and Jonna, the hosts, we were on site doing the rehearsal, and they did just a quick Facebook Live out to folks saying, tune in tomorrow. And so that was their test as well that we were able to do. But it also promoted the event, which was fun. And then there's always a backup plan. So if you can't, if for some reason Facebook shut down, we could quickly move it over to YouTube or something else. So there's a lot of different ways. You definitely want to have a plan B when you're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. How many people tuned in live?
So for the live stream, we really only had about 200 people as registered watching. And then we had a good 20 to 25 people hosting Zoom parties or Facebook watch parties. So those folks probably, they each had, let's say, 10 people. So we think that there were probably somewhere between 400 to 500 people watching it as it was happening. But because it's on Facebook and it stayed up, it's now reached an audience of over 4,000 people.
And we're fixing to have more people watch your recording, so that number hopefully is going to go up. So here's a question from an overarching perspective. As you started to, maybe let me rephrase the question. As COVID-19 was sort of rearing its ugly head and you were thinking, oh my gosh, there's a very strong possibility, and then it is for sure, we cannot do the live event. How did you go about planning to pivot to virtual? Like, at what point in time, how far, before did you have to kind of figure that piece out? And how did you scramble, I'm going to have to say, to do that? So walk us through what you went through from oh my gosh, we got to pivot. And now what do we do to plan for this event? Take us through your life at that point in time, Brennan.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was a little distracted by the Q&A and trying to answer someone's question, so I apologize. But taking it through, well, there was so much happening, and we were trying to pivot our programming virtually. So our program is based on in-person peer support, and so we were pivoting our program as well. So there were a lot of really kind of time-sensitive decisions to be made so that we could still support the 1,000 people that we serve a month, and grieving folks who are impacted in these times, and then also pivot this event. So we recognized pretty early on that we needed to pivot it, and luckily brought in folks to help us do that. But it was a 6-week pivot process. I see one of the questions is how much time is needed to plan a virtual event. Well, it would be great if you had a runway of, let's say, anywhere from 12 months to 3 or 4 months, but we had about 6 weeks. And Elisa, I'm so sorry, I didn't catch kind of the rest of the question, if you want to repeat it.
No, I think it's sort of centered around how far in advance did you plan and what did you go
Okay.
through to get to that point. So you answered it, Brendan. I want to get 2 questions in for sure, because I want to make sure we've got about 4 minutes left, and I want to get 2 questions in. One is a question that was sent to us ahead of time about, the person says, currently I'm worried about how to ask donors for money at, currently and where we are today. So they usually host a major donor thank you in the summer. So do you have any suggestions on how to pivot the summer event online?
Well, we were just talking about this morning with our leadership team at the Dougie Center, because we do host a major donor. There's a couple things that I would say. Is one is keep asking. Don't stop asking during this time. Particularly communicate with those loyal donors who want to hear what you're doing and how you're doing. And how, and then also you want to learn how they're doing and have communication with them. So keep asking. Obviously, you want to be thoughtful in those asks, but don't stop asking during this time. As far as loyalty events, we are actually going to, instead of doing a loyalty event and instead of doing that virtually, we're actually going to do a loyalty mailing and have a small mission-focused, mission-aligned token of appreciation for folks. So that's what we're doing. Lauren, I know lots of people are having these conversations besides just our organization.
Yeah, we've talked to a couple groups, one in particular that has 15 stewardship events that they do over the year. So these aren't fundraising events. These are not ask for money events, but these are, stewardship events. And this foundation in particular is trying to figure out ways that they can keep that engagement, with their supporters. And the virtual platform actually is a very lovely way to move it, because it's going to be like a webinar in terms of being able to provide information. Usually there's someone like a keynote that's speaking, but then there's other elements that they're incorporating into that, and that is bringing in meals for those who register. So they get a meal delivered to their home, be able to sit and have that while they're watching the event. Also bottles of wine or other kind of gifts that they would, have received at an in-person event. And any sort of program, making a digital program that can be given to folks, or even print something that could be sent with the meal. So there's a lot of ways that you can incorporate these different touch points with a virtual event for stewardship, so you can still get your face in front of, your supporters.
Great, thanks for that, Lauren. I think from what you just said, I was going to ask a question around some of the smaller nonprofits who don't have as many staff members, who don't have maybe the capacity to do the virtual fundraiser like you all did and was very successful. But it sounds like from what you just shared and something that you said earlier, Lauren, is that you could do something like a Zoom session like what we're doing right now and leverage that opportunity to get the word out as well as to raise some funds. So I would love to kind of get you guys' perspective as this probably being the last question, watching time, what would be your advice or some key tips for some of the smaller organizations who may not have the bandwidth in terms of budget to do something as large as this virtual fundraiser?
Absolutely. Brendan, do you want me to take that?
Yeah, go for it, sure.
Yeah, so, I think one piece is, having your staff, or even if you're a one-person shop, learn more about the platform. So we're on Blue Jeans right now. You could use Zoom. There's a lot of different platforms that you can, learn about and get comfortable with, and ways that you can bring other people in on those calls. So doing just some research and learning how you can connect folks, through this virtual space rather than having to do a full live stream. event. I think that number one is going to be something that's going to be very essential in the next year for a lot of groups to be incorporating this into their development plans.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. And really appreciate this great conversation and sort of your wisdom after having gone through this virtual fundraiser. So I want to thank Brennan of the Dougie Center, Lauren from Raise Agents, and thank you for this. I want to thank our sponsors and our funders who, without whose support we couldn't make this happen. And then for sure, check out our COVID-19 resources page. And of course, NAO is a membership organization. We would love for you all to be part of our network if you're not. So check us out. And with that, this is a wrap. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.